Where do you get all your shit that you need the next day? Stores.
All right. Good evening, everybody. 6:30. It's July 22nd. That means it is our Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Call us to order. Attendance first. Sorry. Go ahead.
Mr. Haggerty?
Here.
Ms. Austin is absent. Mr. Montiel?
Here.
Mr. Ruddle is absent. Mr. Adams is absent. Ms. Hupka?
Present.
Mr. Renson is absent. Mr. Kaplan?
Present.
Ms. Cicero? Present. And Chair Martinez?
Present.
The quorum is present.
Thank you. First item on the agenda is approval of minutes from May 20th. That is over 2 months ago. Any comments, additions, corrections to the minutes? Nope. Can I get a motion for approval?
Move to approve.
I'll second that.
Mr. Haggerty?
Yes.
Mr. Montiel?
Yes.
Ms. Hupka?
Yes.
Mr. Kaplan?
Yes.
Ms. Cicero?
Yes.
And Chair Martinez?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that. Public forum. Has anybody signed up to speak? This is really loud. Anybody to speak?
No, there's no one in the room and there's no one online.
All right, then we'll move straight into the study session on case 2025-004, non-conforming uses. Staff, please.
Yeah, so for tonight, we're going to be talking about non-residential, non-conforming uses located in the residential districts. That's the only time I'll say all those words. From here, we'll just go non-conforming uses. But these were something that staff was asked to look at as far as the current regulations in the code to see if there's any chance for more flexibility and things of that nature for it. So first, what exactly is a non-conforming use? So these are properties through no fault of their own were illegal use when they were created. And then somewhere along the way, either a code amendment or an annexation or some sort of change happened where it made them now a prohibited use. So for our commercial non-conforming uses, what this means is that they can remain as their own business, as long as they stay in business. So if you're an office in an R1C, you never have to change off that office as long as you stay that office. If there's ever a time where the building sits vacant for over 6 months, then you have to go basically convert it back to what's allowed in that zone district. Businesses can change ownership. So, Office A can transfer to Office B. It can change names and things like that. But there can't be any increases in size to the structure. And then there also can't be any accessory uses along with the structure. And then additionally, they can't expand the lot size and things like that too. So the difficulties this poses for these is that with these non-conforming uses, there's not a lot of incentive for investment in your property. With the limited nature of what these things are, it basically kind of locks you into that one use. So if you can't find somebody, in the future that want to purchase your building to do that exact same use, your options are rather limited. Then in addition to that, you have a commercial use that you're selling with a residential, zone district to it, which creates a discrepancy between, the prices you're probably expecting for a commercial property. And then in addition, if you think about your commercial properties where they, more often than not want to be pushed up the front of the street, they maybe have more lot coverage, things like that. They have a lot of lot standard, nonconformities to them as well, in addition to use. So getting into kind of the ones for Inglewood. So you can kind of see on this map that they kind of focus, around a lot of them around kind of Quincy and Bellevue, as well as just north of the medical district. So all of these are either in the R1 or R2 zone districts. Things above that, so your MUR districts, your MUs, we're not talking about those because they allow for commercial uses in those. So these are purely the R1 and R2s because those are the districts that don't allow any sort of commercial uses to them. And you can kind of see in that third column, a lot of these are offices, grocery, just general business stores. There's a couple of a barber shop, things of that nature as well. So as far as the comprehensive plan, we kind of pulled 3 sections that kind of talk about things to keep in mind when it comes to these. The first one is neighborhood identities. So a lot of these structures and uses are pretty historical buildings. A lot of them were built somewhere between 1910 and 1950. So they've been well established in their neighborhoods as far as what their uses are. Additionally, the comprehensive plan looks to have a diverse retail offering, and these ones are pretty unique as far as their own situations. And the last one is encourage the availability of affordability of fresh food throughout the city. So more for that one's more for those couple of grocery store or grocery type uses that are listed, but yeah. So one kind of city out there in the U.S. that has recently gone through kind of a similar process looking at these is Spokane, Washington. So this is just kind of where they ended up. So they did a revision to their code to allow for these existing commercial structures that had kind of fallen into dilapidation for those same reasons we mentioned earlier, where basically they could go through an administrative hearing process to allow for different uses into those structures. They limited things like site expansion, so no making the lot bigger, that kind of thing. And also, prohibited certain things you wouldn't want to see in a residential district, like drive-throughs, things of that nature. And then they had, specific things that these uses could ask for. So if they needed additional lot coverage, that could be something you could do through an administrative adjustment. So that's just one city that kind of went through something similar to what we're talking about tonight. So after this slide, we'll kind of get into some kind of questions of where we would, hope to get some guidance from you guys as far as your thoughts. But things we kind of want you all to consider while looking through this. The first is what the city has done so far as similar things. So the first 2 of these were done during Code Next, and they were to do with residential nonconformities. So these could be your duplexes or triplexes in the R1 districts. So prior to Code Next, if you had a 800 square foot duplex on an R1 lot, you could not expand that. You couldn't do a mudroom addition. You couldn't do, a shed in the backyard. So with the changes to Code Next, you could, add on basically to the same size that a single family residence could do. Similarly, if if your house was built, say, at 4 feet when it's a 5 foot setback, you could keep that same build line for an expansion. And then the other 2 are more recent in the last year, which were our home occupation changes, which we came through with you guys. So those were, allowing for more flexibility as far as what you can do in your home occupation, as well as creating that special exception process where if you wanted things above and beyond those new flexibilities, there was a method to ask for them. The second is, are there benign uses, so ones that don't have a lot of impact on neighbors? So uses, like offices, things like that, where there's really not a lot of activity going on. Are there some of those types of uses that would be good in these? And then is there other uses that you think would be good in these existing non-conforming lots. All right, so getting into the first question. So should non-conforming uses be allowed to change to a different use? So currently, like I said, the way the code works is if you were an office building, you could not change to a grocery store. And if you were a grocery store, you cannot change to an office. You have to stay exactly what you were. So if you were, a business retail, no office for you. So, and these are just kind of 3 options that staff came up with. If there's any other things, feel free to diverge from these as much as you'd like. But the first one would be keep it as is. So keep it where they need to stay as they are. The second would be to maybe take a look at an existing zone district like the MUR3A, which is the lowest intensity district that allows for some sort of commercial activity, and allow for those similar uses. So these things would be things like personal services. So your barber, your cosmetician, those kind of things, as well as those office spaces, as well as some institutional things like museums and assembly spaces, that kind of stuff. The other option would be to take a look at the whole list of uses and then specifically call out individual ones that could be allowed in these nonconformities. So kind of just create like a short list of ones that would be permissible, or the other way around, and strictly prohibited too. But I'll take a break there and then ask for your input on this one. Then we'll go on to the next one.
For options 1 through 3, are those in order of most restrictive to least restrictive?
Correct.
I have lots of questions, but I don't know when to ask. So what do you want us to ask about right now? Just these 3 options?
Yeah, if you'd like, as far as just kind of this point, or if it's better and more beneficial, I can kind of finish out the rest and we can come back. Whichever one's easier for you guys.
We just want to keep going? Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
All right. You just keep this question in the back of your mind, and we'll come back to it. All right.
Well, do you mind if I jump in real quick?
Sure.
So I want to elaborate on why we're looking at this. So the difficulty with these, we get calls on these 14 properties, not all 14, some of them, a lot. What happens is they get marketed as a commercial building by a real estate agent. People start calling saying, can I do X? Can I do Y? And we have to get on the phone and tell them, no. You can fit into this really, really small square hole or round hole, but most of the time they're a square peg. I'll give you probably the best case that we have right now that most people know about is God Save the Cream. That building is a non-conforming registered non-conforming use as a grocery store. God Save the Cream sells ice cream. They came to us saying, we want to be a store that sells ice cream cones, da-da-da-da. To fit into the definition of that grocery store, they have to sell their product packaged, because the definition says that it's geared for things that are sold for use at home and not for immediate consumption. Ice cream cone is an immediate consumption use. We also had people that were interested in being a coffee shop at that location. Can't do it unless you sold it and canned it, and then you'd have to sell it like you would get it at the grocery store. So for us, it makes our life very difficult, but we're also forcing businesses to change their business model to fit into a location that they really want to be. So we're trying to get out of our own way of saying, okay, well, if you want to be there, why wouldn't we help you? But as Will mentioned, a lot of these businesses can create neighborhood identity. I don't know if anybody knows about the barbershop on Quincy. It's been there for a long time. I've only been able to get in once just to talk to the owner because there was always a line of people and I didn't want to interrupt her service. Been by there a couple times. There's a t-shirt printing place on Quincy as well. Very nondescript brown building. 2 brothers run it. It's actually been a lot of fun getting to know a lot of these people, and they know a lot about each other. But we also have other buildings that sit vacant because it's so hard to find a tenant that fits in that tiny little square hole or round hole. So that's the difficulty. And now that, housing prices are starting to go up higher, if you were to try to develop that as a residential lot, it's almost impossible just because the cost, they're expecting a commercial cost for the property. So the cost of the property is generally so high that to redevelop it, you'd have to build a single family home that's completely maxed out and costs, well over what we're wanting to look for in affordability for homes. So a lot of these properties just kind of stay there. A lot of them previously had kind of redeveloped. You'll see some old commercial buildings that now have single family homes in them. I'm trying to think of, I think it's on Floyd or Girard. There's one that's pulled way up on the corner where they've redeveloped it now into a single family home. It was pretty popular for a while. Now it's kind of tailed off. So we've got these 14, right? These 14 properties left over. One of them is part of a PUD. One of them is located on the global storage PUD. That one will likely go away. They did first reading again last night at council and it got approved. They did first reading a few weeks ago, but the applicant requested a minor change. So that's why it had first reading again. There's another one on Huron that they actually want to turn their existing non-conforming use. It was an old office from the 40s. They want to turn it into an ADU, so that one will likely go away too. So in reality, we have 12 of these locations. But what we're trying to gauge is what is the council and commission and the public's thought on would we want to allow some flexibility? I think Will may not have mentioned this. There's kind of this national craze to bring back the corner market into neighborhoods. And that kind of ties in really well with what we're looking at here.
A question.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they just go to the Board of Adjustments with some of these?
Can't do a use variance. Use variances are against the law. So the code you cannot request a variance to a use. Back in the 70s, they did that a lot. Somewhere in there, they've determined that is no longer allowed. So we can't process use variances to say, hey, can we get this use in this district? We cannot do that anymore. We haven't been able to do that for a few years. But there's a couple of these that did get use variances in like the 60s and 70s, so they could be flexible. Our attorneys tell us we don't do that anymore. And I haven't, in my 10-year career, we've never done that in any city I worked in. So it stopped sometime prior to that.
And if you think about it, there's a lot of risk in use variances with, a board approving of use that the city has dictated is not allowed in a district. There could be a lot of concern. You might see like an industrial plan in your residential neighborhood because of a board approval like that. So, and
most of these lots don't meet thresholds for rezoning. So they're in this weird kind of no man's land of existence, sort of like duplexes that are located in R1 districts. You can just be there, and that's about it.
How is a use variance different from a PUD? Isn't what Lava Island did a use variance?
Lava Island did a conditional use permit, so even in our code, it's allowed, but
okay,
you have to go through a certain process.
Okay.
You could do a PUD. It's not generally one that we push for, is for people to do plan unit developments for something that small. Nor is it something that a small business is likely going to go forward with because they're expensive and it's very time consuming. And so at the end of this, once we get through all of the different items, we start to look at how this would work in our processes. And that's a discussion that we want you to all have too, is there's ones where we can get a lot of public input and there's a lot of control, but it takes a lot of time and it costs a lot of money versus things that would be approved by right at an administrative staff level that can go very fast. But again, it's staff only, or is there something intermediary that may work better? So as we go through, if you have questions, let us know. It's a very odd topic, non-conforming uses, and we're looking at it in a very progressive way that very few cities have kind of tackled.
Just one more quick question. You said we're kind of going to be down to 12. Are actually all of the other 12 currently actively using their non-conforming use? Because I'm looking at the one at 4100 South Logan doesn't look like it is.
Yeah,
not that we know of. Most of these have registered within the last 3 to 4 years, but again, Code Next eliminated the registration process. So we've sent letters out to all of the property owners. We've heard back from quite a few. We've met with a lot of the business owners, and we're continuing to meet with some of the property owners. There's 4 that we haven't spoken to anybody on, like they haven't reached out to us, or we haven't been able to get in touch with them. But yeah,
So there might even be less that we're dealing with. Because it says if they're not using it for 180 days, that goes away anyway, so.
right, and that may be part of this conversation is, do you want to include those that are already here? That some of them are just warehouse. Well, how do you determine that somebody's not using it as a warehouse? I can store a book in there and call it a warehouse. One of them is keeping chickens. I wasn't peeking over anybody's fences to see if there were chickens running around, so I mean they're kind of hard. Our previous process, we would send out a letter once a year. Folks would sign it and say, "Yep, we're still doing this," and then they would mail it back to us. And that was the whole registration process. So we're trying to figure out what we want to do with these remaining 12, and if there is a way, if you feel like maybe you only want to do certain ones and not all of them, that's the discussion that we're here to have right now.
So we're not talking about adding any additional properties with non-conforming uses. It's just the existing ones that we need to determine what to do.
Right now, that's the first conversation. Is we're only looking at this small batch. At the end, I think we're stealing his thunder. He may ask you the question: is this something that you want to look at on a bigger scale across the community, like doing something similar? That may look at like, what would we do if we wanted to do this with new property in certain locations? Or do you only want to stick with what we have? So we'll tackle the what we have first, and then
And we'll kind of leave it open-ended for you.
he's going to open that book
Yeah.
towards the end.
All right, we'll circle back. We'll circle back.
Please proceed with the rest and
Yeah.
we'll discuss it at the end.
All right, so everyone remember the first question. So non-conforming uses, should they be able to allow to change uses? All right. Second question is, should they be allowed to expand? So not so much talking about the expansion of lot sizes, but talking about the expansion of structures. So right now, the way this works, again, like I mentioned, if you had, your 900 square foot ice cream shop, business is booming, you want to add on like a 300 square foot, extra freezer space, under the current regulations, that'd be prohibited. So with that in mind, the first option, kind of similar, is do we keep it the same as it is? So you keep your existing structure, no expansions. The second would be to look at something that kind of links back to the base district. So if you're in the R1C, we'll look at R1C standards for expansions. If you're in the R2, we'll look at R2 standards. The third option would be kind of similar to that the other question we asked, where do you want to maybe tie it to the MUR3A, so that most restrictive commercial district? Or is there something, where we do more of a case by case unique basis to it? So this is just kind of an example of what the code currently says for these districts that these lots are in. So all of them right now are either in the R1A, R1C, or R2B. So, if you took maybe that option 2 route, if you had a structure in the R1A, you could go up to a 40% lot coverage, and then up to those setbacks in the 30-foot height regulations. Same thing with like the R2B, you could go, a little bit higher lot coverage, and then, the MUR3A, which would be, more flexibility than the base districts, which allows more lot coverage and more height, and then a slightly reduced setback. And then remember that option 4 would just be to kind of do it more on a case by case basis. And then the last one is, do we allow for updates to site conditions? So I mentioned kind of at the beginning that a lot of times with these, they kind of disincentivize investment in the property. So this could be things like off-street parking, or landscaping improvements to the site, things like outdoor seating, things of that nature. So things not necessarily the structure, but are improvements beyond the structure on the site. So currently, just like everything else in the code right now, it says no, you can't do any of these. Can't do any of these improvements. So similar to the last question, we could look at something where you could do, up to those base districts, so where a residential structure could add a shed to the property, so too could the non-conforming use. If there's a lot coverage, they could build up to that lot coverage for their parking and landscaping requirements and things like that. And then similarly, an option maybe where they kind of handle this more on a case-by-case basis. So as Brian mentioned, this is kind of the slide, while thinking about these other ones and, which options to look at, this is just kind of an infographic on how these processes might fit in. So on the left, and on mainly that bottom row is probably the best one to look at, but on a by right decision, so something where the code just has words they must follow, it'd be kind of similar like maybe a building permit review. Something where it's an administrative adjustment or decision, kind of fits into our administrative adjustments where we can make minor allowances for things. And then the next one being more akin to like a conditional use permit where it would come before this commission. Or something where city council is the ultimate decider with a recommendation from this group, which would be kind of similar to like you mentioned with like PUD or zoning map amendment, things like that. So this is just kind of where we'll be headed after this. So Brian and I are speaking with the non-conforming businesses and property owners to kind of talk about how these regulations affect them and things that they would like to see with change on the way their properties are regulated. And then we'll also be going out to the public for neighborhood nights. The one on here for July 16th we were not able to make it to because it got rained out, so that one did not happen. We'll be at those other three as well as the block party. So, and that is it for the PowerPoint. So are there any questions? And
Well, are you going to add one since you had to drop one neighborhood nights?
we
Can you add
would
one?
if there were more after those three.
Can you add something? Because I think
So we'll add the
outreach
block
on
party.
this is-
We're
We'll be
adding
going to the
Inglewood block party. So neighborhood nights, they don't, if one gets canceled, they won't give it another night. It just gets canceled. But we had already started to add neighborhood block or the Inglewood block party onto this one. So it's a much bigger scale than neighborhood nights for us to be able to do additional outreach.
Questions, discussion? Go ahead, Brandon, let's start it off.
Oh, did you want to go? Go ahead.
Eric.
I was just gonna ask a quick question about Quincy Barber Shop. They only have two barber chairs in there. Is that because by code right now, they're not allowed to add anymore?
I don't think we've ever been asked by them to make improvements or additions on that property. But yeah, I mean, it could potentially, as far as making if they wanted to expand that building, for sure, that would fall under this.
There's nothing in code that restricts them to 2 chairs, though.
No, but
Building and their use.
you're limited on the intensity of the use. So depending on who's sitting in these chairs, you could have somebody that's really strict in interpreting the code and saying, nope, you had 2 chairs, you can never have more than 2 chairs, you can't get any bigger. Unfortunately, I've been in organizations where people have done stuff like that. So that's why if we go a different direction, we want to be sure that the standards are clear for whoever is interpreting them on our end, and then whoever is trying to abide by them on the other. So yeah, right now it's so limited to that intensity level that you could tie it to most anything.
Yes, sir. I just have a quick question about sort of which way the winds are blowing. Like, what is the sentiment? Well, two parts to this. First off, have there been complaints about any of these NCUs from neighbors? Because they've been there forever. Right? Second, go ahead.
No, we haven't had any complaints about any of the non-conforming uses. To be honest, most of them have just kind of integrated into their neighborhoods over time. People know that they're there, and honestly, I don't know that we've ever gotten any real complaints about any of them. There might have been some complaints about one for a while.
Yeah, the previous group that was in there before God Save the Cream had complaints from neighbors. You know, I understand why the neighbors were complaining about that one. They were having like outdoor parties and things like that that were for sure against the code, and they had a lot of code violations go along with that. But they're not there anymore because the God Save the Cream group went into that structure. So for the existing, businesses that are in there, I haven't seen any.
So my second question there is about sort of which way the wind is blowing, like either sentiment from the community or from council of like a strict division between residential and commercial uses and zones. Is there a sentiment there? Is there a drive for one versus the other?
So this is the first step as far as this goes. We've gotten some direction to take a look at these regulations, kind of similar to that slide I mentioned about the home occupations and then the nonconformities for the residential ones. But this is the first stop as far as getting input.
There's no urgency, though, that's been expressed to you, right?
So there's been input from some of these businesses that these regulations are hard, and so it's kind of coming from that direction as well as a couple of council members.
Okay, well, let's talk about, if you don't mind, some of these addresses. This is because this is important. For instance, 4325 South Huron. The business is Benjamin Fleet Building Inspection. As far as I could tell, that's a regular house that's just doing office work. Am I correct?
No. So there's a structure in back of the house that was originally built in what the story I was told was it's a small house in the back. It was built in the 40s. That was the original home on the property. Then they built the front house. The family moved into the front house and then started operating the business out of the rear house. It's small. It's like 650, 700 square
Okay, but
feet.
that's like
That's
an
the one
ADU.
that is attempting to turn it into an ADU now.
Oh, okay.
And as
That's
they told us, we want to just go turn this into an ADU
excellent.
and get out of this non-conforming use business. I believe from talking to them, the use hasn't been on site in quite a while.
Okay, no, that's okay. It's off the table, though. Sounds like it. It's going to be an ADU.
That's their intent, yeah.
That makes sense to me, because I was like, that doesn't make any sense. All right. 595 Bellevue, there's two things along Bellevue. Two businesses that have been operating there a long time. There's the Global Medicine and the Arapahoe Mental Health Center.
They're on two different blocks.
Right?
So-
I'm just talking about both of those. So you're saying that if they were ever to move out, it would have to be a mental health center, or could it be any, both of these that seem to be care centers? So what's the limits on that?
So the words on this slide, as far as them, are what their actual non-conforming use is. So depending on when it was created, you can see some are much more general and some are much more restrictive. It would be the interpretation of what that says. So if one says business, that they would need to have a business type use that would go in there. If it's a garden nursery business, then that would need to be a garden nursery type.
Okay, that's all I know. So that's still pretty vague. I mean, we're not going to put. Is there a need to put a grocery store there today? Right? There's none of that on Bellevue.
Well, so but for 3296 South Washington, it would need to be some type of grocery use.
Yeah, that we get. We have two grocery stores. We have the one on Dartmouth and the one on Washington.
Correct.
Now, we don't have any food deserts in Englewood that I'm aware of. Am I right? Grocery store deserts? They're nice. They're convenience stores, right?
I'll leave that up to your
That's what I'm
decision.
just pointing out, everybody.
Yeah.
It's not like there's a food desert going on.
Okay, but in particular on 501.
Yeah.
In particular on 501, that one right now is for lease.
Mhm.
And so once it's for lease for 6 months, if it's not used, it reverts back to corner store.
If that business isn't operating.
No, then it goes back to residential.
It goes
So
back
just because
to
it's for sale
residential.
doesn't mean that business isn't operating. If it's a vacant structure, it would have 6 months a
Okay,
6-month.
I
I
don't
think
know,
they're
but
they're
it,
not
I
there.
don't know,
They're
but it looked
permanently
vacant when I
closed.
walked by today.
I just looked it up. It's closed, and
When
I mean,
I-
I think that's
Okay.
the issue. Is both of those maybe were a corner shop at one time, but that isn't necessarily maybe for a grocery store. But
Yeah.
like, what else could they do? Go ahead.
That is the other tough part about the current way the regulations are written is that, it's hard to pin down a date when something goes vacant.
Sure.
It's not like an opening day where there's like a business license, things attached to it. So it is tougher to verify a vacancy date than it is to.
Right, but also I guess the point of that is if it is vacant, then the way it's written now, it just remind me again. So it is now no longer an office space. Does it revert back to grocery or does it go to residential?
Right. So 501 East Dartmouth,
Yep.
if it was not filled with a grocery use, it would then have to meet the uses that are allowed in the R1C. So a single family residence.
Okay. Which has a huge parking lot on the back. And falls into one of those lines there where it would take a lot to convert it to a house or whatever. And it being just thinking out loud, trying to get the same business back in there, how many people are not renting office space? They're working out of their homes. So anyway, I'm just talking out loud.
That one you
Wanted
can
to
be
make sure I
office. Yeah,
understood
anyway,
that.
it's shown as grocery.
But it
so you
was
can-
an office. There
Nope.
was an office in there now.
There was one of them that I think the original non-conforming registration was for grocery store, and I think it's that one. It was grocery store, and they got some kind of variance in the 60s or 70s to turn it into an office. But again, that's something we can't do anymore, are the use variances. So there are a couple there are a few that we would probably have to go through and track from the original. We have a lot of how they were originally registered, but they've changed throughout the years through these weird processes. So we would have to go back and verify. There's some, like the one on, 3296 South Washington that we got calls for all the time. So we have like folders with all of the information about that one. Some of the other ones we don't get calls on all the time, so we don't have as much info. But yeah, I think that one originally was a grocery store and then transitioned into an office.
Yeah,
through
if
a
I remember right,
variance
that's the one where
process.
like the kind of cut off corner. And it's like I think it's like an architecture maybe
Yeah,
or
I've seen
something.
it.
Corner
We've
entrance,
gone
and then
through with
across
it.
the street.
Yeah, there
is
was
also
one.
a-
Yeah, there's a couple with variances.
Also, across the street, there's a variance. So just in particular, it seems to me like that would make sense where it was more flexible than just going back to a residential.
It
Since-
seems to me that,
Since there's across the street, but anyway.
well, no, my initial thought is just going all the way down these, including the keeping chickens business, is that I would go towards a case by case basis on all of these. I wouldn't want because there's just a world of. I don't think anybody wants to live next door to a livestock concern. Anyway, that's my thought. Anybody else?
So I just like zooming way out here. Some of these neighborhood uses. I don't know if we can turn these mics down a little bit. Thanks. I hear him back there trying. Thank you. That's better. Thank you. These are things that have defined walkable and accessible neighborhoods before sort of post-war zoning made a hard separation between residential and commercial. Inglewood is not a suburban sprawl. These are the kind of things that define sort of the character of the neighborhoods. They're not sprawling businesses. They're not. I am of the mind to like these are things that we want to preserve and protect and cherish and like make more accessible to community beneficial uses. So that's sort of my high level kind of perspective, and I'd love to hear some conversation if there's any like other thoughts or perspectives sort of on that high level.
Well, yeah, sure. I agree. If keeping the character is a grocery store, but keep in mind, again, I just don't want to paint a broad stroke over all of this. The property at 3998 South Fox is an old warehouse. And as long as I've lived here, maybe there's a book inside, but that property was purchased. It's a big warehouse And the guy who owned it bought it in 1992, has not done anything with it since. And if he were to sell that for residential, even if residential's really expensive, he paid $40,000 for it in 1992. He'd surely make some money, So I think a case-by-case basis on some of these places where, like you said, high-level overview on where some of the neighbors, where it matters. But nothing's holding this business back, this warehouse. He could convert it right now and put housing in there. There's just no reason why it's not doing anything.
Colin.
Um, I agree. He can keep doing what he's doing. He can then do that. So I think my thing is option 2 makes the most sense, where they can have limited change. If they want to keep it as a warehouse, he can keep it as a warehouse. We don't want chickens going on and all over, or dog parks or dog kennels or anything like that. But if there's like limited transitions to them, because like God save the cream, I'd love for them to be able to scoop a cup of ice cream, right? And be able to put that in there. And I think going to your, corner shop that had, maybe even a corner shop had that opportunity at a soda fountain at one point in time in a grocery store, and that was just what they called it. And so if we can allow those limited uses and define that to make it a little more easy, where they can just go to staff and be able to do that, I think I would be in favor of that, allowable for just these certain things would be where I would go.
Does anybody on the commission have a sentiment of restricting the ability? Like, is anybody like for option 1? Like, whatever it's listed as, it needs to stay that. Does anybody have that? Okay, let's take that off the table. So then we're talking about what we allow, or what we would recommend to allow for one NCU to become another. Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, so I think I'm probably somewhere between options 1 and 2. I agree with what Chair Martinez said about that we should be encouraging these kind of neighborhood serving businesses that benefit the community in which they sit and create walkable, self-contained neighborhoods. I'm fully in favor of moving in that direction. I think so. In some ways, I think option 2 is overly limiting, but I also, to the point that Brian made earlier, want us to adopt a set of rules that are clear for the city and for businesses. I think, so I think having something where it's not a case by case basis, but we do have a defined set of uses that we've determined are generally what we support in our communities. And then one final point is I very much specifically don't think parking should be one of those uses. I think especially just surface level parking without a structure or anything is not conducive to neighborhood, the neighborhood feeling. I think if we're trying to encourage these, walkable communities, that's probably not the best way to do it. So that's where I'm kind of, landing, I guess, somewhere between, 2 and 3 in that sense. I think there's pieces of both that I would take.
Yeah, if I could real quick. Yeah, so the reason that one's on there is because we had to take the whole sentence of what was in there. I totally agree with you on that. The one thing I do kind of want just to keep in the back of your mind as far as that option 2, and really these options, remember that these are just kind of talking points for us. So if there's things that jump out at you as more or different zone districts you want us to look at and things like that, we can do that too. With this MUR3A, there's a couple of uses I think that both of you kind of mentioned that might get left out on that, specifically the more restaurant type uses, so like coffee shops, your ice cream shops, those kind of things. Those would be more in that restaurant food and beverage service type use, which is not allowed in the MUR. So if those are things that you want to see as options for these businesses, that to be something we would need to kind of call out specifically, or maybe look at that option 3.
Would a coffee shop fall under that as a restaurant as well?
It'd be food and beverage services.
So
which would be, same Same as like all restaurants are under that food and beverage
Okay.
services.
Which
Yeah,
is
then
not
definitely.
allowed in MUR 3A.
Correct. Yeah, MUR 3A is very limited to basically like office and personal services type businesses.
Where do we have MUR3A currently?
I think the majority of it is just south of City Center. I think, Brian, is that right? I'm trying to remember the map if it's the little orange one or not. There's like 2 little slivers of it. There's not a ton.
It's not much.
Yeah.
I think it's actually the block behind me. I'm MUR3B, and then they split it off.
Yeah.
The guy who used to live behind me, they've since scraped his house, had chickens and was allowed chickens because of that MUR3A thing. Speaking of chickens, that's the only reason I'm holding back, is because I would have thought that in Englewood, you're allowed 5 on the property, right? I would have thought
It's
that
something like
that
that, yeah.
was, right, that was the limited and the barrier. I mean, if we throw in, oh, you can also have livestock, I don't know, you're not selling me on that.
So that in that kind of Spokane example, and I think we at their regulations in with your packet, they kind of did a kind of A and B one where they had uses that they wanted to see, and then also uses that were strictly prohibited. Which something like that could get looked at too. Like home occupations, those allow for you can do a lot of stuff, but there are specific things that you're explicitly not allowed to do. So maybe if we could write an animal care not allowed line in there or something.
Yeah, so I think maybe that defined list then what would be allowed would make, I think, the most sense to me. And then can I go into the part about improvements and stuff too? I think to me, I've gone back and forth on whether that should be allowable to the MUR 3A or to the current zoning district that they're in. And I mean, in my head, I feel like it should still conform to the neighborhood. So it makes sense for me to like that limited footprints and limited impact to what would normally be allowed within whatever neighborhood that is in would be my thought there.
I disagree with that. I think just the nature of a commercial building is different, right? And I think that if we tie them to the residential coverage standards and height, then we're kind of we're still walking in a lot of those things that would prevent them from improving the property, because in most of these cases, or at least in sort of the quintessential cases, like God Save the Cream, right? I know you're a fan.
Okay.
I think you've already got a commercial property there, and so chances are that it is already physically non-conforming, and so any change that they would make would also be physically non-conforming. And so I think there's the question of use, and I fully think they should be able to serve ice cream. It's so wasteful. But there's also, I think, if it is a successful business, then I would love to be able to see them invest in that business. And I think, the warehouse space perhaps, could be sold to be another business that is more beneficial to the community and more profitable to the owners if they were able to invest in the site and make changes. So I think, understanding these lots as commercial properties to me makes sense. And if you tie them to the underlying zone, you're basically saying it has to look like a house, and that to me is too restrictive.
And I can provide a little context to what Noah's saying. I don't know if this is in your packet, but of all the lots, over at least 9 of them exceed their lot coverage requirements for their underlying district, and only 2 of them even get close to meeting their setbacks for their underlying district. So they're almost busting at the seams on a lot of these already. So it would, if we follow the base district, it kind of eliminates most of their abilities to do any kind of expansion already. So just, If there's any information that y'all need like that, let us know so we can make sure and provide it to you, because we've got.
And for these existing NCUs, I mean, most, if not all of them are corner lot, lot. You know, they're not so much.
Yeah, I think like 11 or 12 of them are corner
Yeah,
lots.
it's all but 3 of them are corner lot.
What if we concentrated on this use by right kind of thing? And then if somebody really had to expand, then could they go to the Board of Adjustments if they really wanted to?
Well, I think we need to separate the conversation here between the existing ones from we might.
So the way the code is written now, no, they couldn't do anything. What your group is doing is starting this process to say, well, if we would let this happen, how would we do it? So would you want to do, the Spokane example is a good example of where they have kind of a 2-tiered approach. The first tier is it's an administrative review, very much like we do administrative adjustments, in which their director makes the decision. If they get a lot of feedback from the community, they can bump that up to the next tier of approval, and that's a hearing officer. And they essentially hold a public hearing. And then that hearing officer makes the determination on whether the use is allowed or not. But they do it for the entire project. So the entire project is looked at as a whole, from land use to, are they going to do any improvements? Do they want to put in more parking? No parking. But they're looking at it as a whole project rather than saying, is the land use allowed? We'll deal with everything else at a different step. It's kind of all done all at once. So that's always one way to look at it, is we package the whole thing up almost exactly the way you do conditional use. And we look at everything as a whole. We publish it to the neighborhood. The neighborhood, sees the signs. We put it on the website, whatever, noticing requirements go with it. That way other people have input. That's one way to do it. Or it just gets reviewed with a building permit by Will. And it moves on. It depends on how you want to do it. Or it goes to council, or it goes to Brad. Depends on where you want to go with it.
Well, yeah, and I'm seeing really 3. Cumbersome folks who jump off from
I just don't want to see a lot of, I think what you can expect input from citizens who are going to want to say. So I don't want to see a lot of hoops, but at the same time, I don't think people would be very happy by having just the city okay it. So there needs to be a happy medium, another board. I don't know. See, that's why I kept saying, why not Board of Adjustments? Obviously not something. Well, I like this idea where it goes to design. It's looked at. You put out this, like you said, you put out notifications. The Board of Adjustments has, I got one, so I had to put a big notice on my lawn that had to be so big, and then anybody could go to the hearing and fight it. And that's what I would.
I think if we're talking about this existing set of non-conforming uses, requiring that level of process to me seems like too much. I would be comfortable with potentially something like a by right decision if you tie it to the MUR 3A. Again, I don't know exactly how these properties would fit with those standards currently, or the administrative adjustment sort of model where they're trying to make a change, it goes to staff, and goes through existing sort of low level process that we have. I think when we start talking about new opportunities for these kinds of uses in residential areas, that's a different conversation. But I think for these properties, I would be very comfortable with a minimal process required for expansions.
You're talking about building.
Yeah.
Building.
Yeah.
And the use.
I mean, if we're talking about the existing properties, at least for me, I would be okay with if we do go the route of having, these are non-conforming uses that are approved, that would be consistent with a by right use at that point.
So it could also be something where, maybe you have an allowance that's, across the board for these. So, you say everything is, 5 foot side and front setbacks. And then, if someone needs to ask for addition above that, where we do kind of a special exception like we did for home occupations. So where there's, a more flexible base allowance, similar to, base allowance in the code where that's a use by right. And then if you want to get even more than that, then you have to ask for it. That could be something too.
You are. But for use, I am definitely leaning towards option 3 of sort of also a set of like here's a list of things, but not just locking it into that list, also allowing some flexibility there, just knowing that things change over time. And, we've had a lot of old things in code that don't really make sense anymore. Like this is allowed and that's not allowed. And so some flexibility, but also, community beneficial uses, what we see today, grocery, food and beverage, personal services, all of these types of things, but then something may come up in the future that might fit that as well that we want to make some room for.
I think you guys have all got me convinced on the MUR3A. The only concern I have is the height of 40 feet. Does feel a little higher than I think I like. So I don't know if there's, again, a custom ability to do something with that as well.
Is there also an ability to, since these are corner and end lots, just keeping these focus, we don't want one of these flanked on either side by residential. I don't think that would be typical. But, keeping it restricted to those types of lots.
We can certainly tailor anything. I think the Spokane example gave people the ability to expand only a certain percentage past what they already have, so we can certainly take a look at tailoring very specific allowances while we continue to do more research.
The other one, I think maybe to think about too on this is the front setback. So for, if you look at kind of this picture that kind of illustrates a lot of them. Oh, I went too far. Okay, there we go. Got it back. You can kind of see a lot of them, kind of pushed up to streets. I think that's probably the other one that they're the most likely to, if you took those MUR3A standards as a holistic, that'd be the hardest one for them to meet. But,
no, good point. And so maybe MUR3A is not even the base to go from, but businesses, you want activation right on the street.
But we could still add, a specific to these, standards where it's just for these lots, and then, kind of go from there as well.
That ties into another question that I have. And actually one of the businesses brought this up too. Activation of outdoor space, like places that specifically there's one that has a deck that was already built and currently they can't use it. And their question is, would we ever be able to use it? Or in the Spokane example, they call out outdoor sales. So like sidewalk sales, things like that are always allowed and they can't be restricted. Is that something that this group would be interested in allowing going forward or prohibiting or?
In my view, I think that the Spokane example was good in restricting drive-through uses, which is not conducive to neighborhood context, but all of that other stuff I would be supportive of.
To me, it just depends on the neighborhood. I just don't want to draw a definition that's just going to outline all of Englewood. Every little pocket is different. So,
Yeah.
of course, in a busy area, we should have some outdoor seating. But in some of these quiet nooks, people will not be happy with that.
I don't
So-
think we want to create an entirely new overlay, though, if some areas are allowed this and some are not. You can tell me about the complication of that, or whether that would be something that would be.
In the businesses that we've talked to, we've asked them, we've shown them the implementation slide and said, what are you okay with between 1, 2, 3, and 4? And most of them have been fine for the first 3. The fourth one that requires like 4 to 6 months, they're not necessarily okay with. That takes a while. The ones, the by right and the administrative adjustment, and even the decision by this body, they seem to all be okay with. They've said, we would be happy going that route if we needed to. We don't have any issue or heartburn over it. It's not overly expensive. It's not overly cumbersome to get through. The PUD type decision is the one where they've kind of drawn the line and said that is an issue.
For sure.
The other one that someone else has brought up are pass-through windows. So not a drive-through, but if it's a walk-up window for any type of establishment, is that something that we want to be overly restricted? There have already been a lot of questions from the business owners on some of this that we didn't see covered in other regulations, but we certainly want to explore them in the.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if we build out a robust list of allowable uses and even, building forms and coverage and setbacks and all of that, we keep it as far to the left of this chart as possible, and then anybody who wants to get a variance, they go on down the line.
I just wanted to say, I think it's important to keep in mind that what we allow is not necessarily, what is going to happen, right? So in the context of the South Broadway revitalization conversations, there's been, a lot of talk about how there is, the allowance for building a lot more housing on Broadway, but commercially it hasn't made sense to do that. And so we haven't seen that. And so part of the conversation is how do we, encourage the kinds of development that we want to see? And I think, Brenda, to your comment about, every neighborhood is different. I think the reality is that if you live in an area that is a quiet residential nook with large lots and low density, then that's probably not a place that commercially it makes sense to set up a business like this. And again, we're only talking about these properties anyway, but just thinking ahead to the larger conversation versus where you see these, currently are in the parts of Englewood that have higher density and can support, business activity with the sort of the community that exists. And so I think, I would agree that I don't feel like it needs to be a neighborhood by neighborhood decision. I think the sort of characteristics of the neighborhood will, prevail in that case anyway.
It is only these properties. At no time is it ever going to expand. There are no other grandfathered properties that you know of. Is that correct?
That's the second part of this question.
None others that we know of. This list is all the ones that we know of.
Okay. There's
The other question that we've talked about is there an appetite to do this for new ones? And we would, and I'll be honest with you, we would assume that it would follow a totally different process than what we're doing now. So question one, big picture is just, what do we want to do with these 12 to 14 lots? And then is there any appetite to look at this as a new thing or not? We're happy with either answer or any direction. We're just asking questions because we don't want to get to the end of the game and then realize that we skipped something.
Yeah.
So we're trying to
So
ask as many questions as we can.
I think most of the conversation that we've been having so far certainly applies to the existing. Let's just like put a bright line there, and then we can talk about expansion separately.
Are you still talking existing? Because I got one more
I
thing.
was going to add on to the conversation that you guys had before and onto what you said. But for instance, I have to figure out, I don't know which address it is, but if it changed to something else and it needed to have a deck or a patio, I think those things, or even a pass-through window, because that's how restaurants survive. So having that extra outdoor space is how a restaurant survives. Mutiny Cafe on further north, that's how they survived through COVID, was they had a pass-through window that we could buy coffee. I lived a block away from a restaurant that was wildly popular. And on Fridays, if you didn't park by 3, you didn't get a parking place because everybody came to these restaurants. But so it was great. And I could walk there anytime, no complaints about that. So in the fear of that, though, the parking, but also it had a time limit of when they stopped. So I don't know if that needs to be added in, but a time limit if it is a restaurant, if it is a business that would be louder than just whatever, just think about that as well.
I know that parking is going to be a main concern of residents of around these places should they expand. Has Inglewood ever done permitted parking, or are there options to kind of mitigate that?
There have been some of those. I know around the medical district, I think there are a couple of blocks that are that way. Yeah, so our public works department issue, like you'll see them all across Denver where they're like, residents only, or like a permit parking.
Certain hours, permits for between these hours. Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, I have one more.
Yeah, go ahead.
In all of that, all of these buildings are older, and I am not familiar with historic Inglewood, what those requirements are. I should be, but I'm not. So can you give us just a basic on if anything's designated historic? I know in this, I don't think anything is, but.
So on an Inglewood level, there's not any sort of requirement for historical properties. The Historic Preservation Committee is kind of working through historically designated city.
We've submitted our license to become a certified local government. We got the ability to designate landmarks and districts in 2023 when Code Next, or 2023 when Code Next was adopted. We haven't designated one yet. All of these buildings were built before 1965. The oldest one going back to 1911. So we have some very, very old buildings. And part of our neighborhood nights, we're partnering with the Historic Preservation Commission. They're doing some outreach to talk about historic preservation. And we're going to be sitting with them talking about, from a preservation side of this. These are some of our older buildings, older commercial buildings. So that's the other reason we want to try to keep them active. Because if you don't keep them active, they fall apart. And that's what we don't want to have happen.
I wonder if we couldn't do this in kind of 2 pieces for the next year. And that is make a decision and take to council something about these 11 properties. And then the broader conversation that we're having about whether or not we expand this into other areas maybe happens after Inglewood's first mayoral election. Because you're opening a big can of worms that could make people distort some of this, and this information is very kind of confusing right now for even us. I spent a couple days with it and made my
That could certainly be a way to look at it. This is almost like a test case to see what could happen. These are already there, so it's the easiest test case for us because the properties already exist, the buildings already exist, businesses already exist. So what can we do if we, change our rules a little bit? Then what happens? And then come back at a different time. We're really at the mercy of you all in our council. So we listen to the direction that you all give us into the public. So we're asking a bunch of questions to a lot of people. And what we'll ultimately do is come back to you all with some changes or some more discussion on, all right, now here's everything that we've heard. And here's what we've drafted to try to meet everything that we've heard. So.
Can I ask? Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's also kind of question that we want to feedback on too. Is that information you want us to gather while we go through these neighborhood nights and things like that, or maybe leave those for a later date? So.
I want to ask the commission for clarity of consensus for the existing NCUs, sort of preserving, allowing a change in use within some set of framework of community beneficial use or neighborhood beneficial use, and also the ability to change to expand if needed. I mean, are we all on the same page about and not the nitty gritty of defining what those guardrails are, but like, are we all on the same page of allowing these things?
Yeah, I do have a question. So if we, depending on like, what are the next steps for this? Like, where would it go?
So we'll go to these neighborhood nights. We have a city council study session scheduled for like the middle of August. Really asking both those groups the same questions we're asking this group. You know, like how do you see this framework, and you know, is there kind of guidance on it? From there, we'll kind of do similar to home occupations, where we'll kind of get a kind of an outline of what that looks like, and then bring it back to for any sort of code update.
And then one more question. If we have a list of things that we are saying that we allow and then leave the flexibility to administrative or to you all to adjust, does that provide the guidance that you need, or is that too vague? Because like you said, you want this to be able to be interpreted in the future. I just don't want us to give you something you're like, that's not really helpful.
What I would say is I would anticipate at least one more study session with you all. So give us direction tonight on, do you want us to make changes? What kind of things do you want to allow? It doesn't have to be concrete direction on, we want this person to make the decision. You know, you can say we would like, if a group wants a staff decision or a staff decision with the ability to come to like the commission for appeals, or staff doesn't feel like they can make the decision, kind of like the Spokane example, we can bump it up to the secondary decision body, which would be you all. Try to help us get that direction. You don't have to nail it all down tonight. We can take your input, council's input, our business and property owner input, and our public input, and kind of draft a set of guardrails and we would come back to you all ultimately and have at least one more study session where we can talk about, okay, here's where we've kind of landed. Is this about where you want to go? Then we can tweak from there, and then we would start the adoption process.
So in recognition of Brenda's suggestion of sort of separating these things of, God, what the?
Just try this one.
And what Brenda said of sort of separating existing from new, I think that's appropriate, and that's helpful. Oh God, now I'm all distracted. Where did I go with that? That we can give some basic guidance here tonight on these things, and we'd love to hear, like, we can give you some direction and love to come back with like a proposed list. But right now for uses, I'm thinking option 3. Neighborhood beneficial uses, more expansive than MUR 3A, so less restrictive than that. Also less restrictive on building form, especially because of the front setback. Does anybody have any different thoughts than that?
The only, like you said, less restrictive than MUR 3A, except for like the parking. So like you said, the beneficial uses only one, whatever that list is.
I agree with Noah's comment of just take parking out, surface parking out. But you tell us if you need more direction from that of what I think. Oh, and then also the last thing of the if we come up with that robust sort of list of both uses and forms of making those by right decisions and keeping as much in that column as possible, and then sort of what those if somebody wants to appeal, they can go beyond that. Any other thoughts from this side over here? Do you guys need anything more from us?
I think that makes sense to me.
Are there any other uses that we would say, like the example of parking, that we absolutely don't want to see as an available use?
Well, I think automobile would be problematic.
You think
I was
what?
going to mention that. I didn't see it in a lot of this. I saw there's one property that does, it was that one on Dartmouth.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe there is. I don't know if it's on.
It was vague though. It
If I can
said,
make
But
one
they could
suggestion on
stay
that
as
portion,
that.
we
It's just if they wanted to change, then they wouldn't be able to. Nobody else would be able to
Right.
change to that.
If I can make one
Yeah.
suggestion on that. We could, it kind of got tossed around a lot of times and talked over or home occupations,
Mhm.
it's prohibited use list. It does
Dogs.
disallow things like that, and then also like marijuana and hair and things like that.
And
Well,
dog kennels.
and I think we also need to be mindful of, there's a nuisance code violations
Yes.
of like, that, we don't have to restrict it here. There's already requirements that restrict noise and encroachments and things like that.
But we could start with that. I mean, what I meant to say though is we could start with that list, and then if there's extra ones we got to pass on there, we can.
Yeah, that was my thought as well. Was we already had that conversation when we talked about home occupations, about which specific things we thought weren't suitable in a neighborhood, and that's what we're talking about again. So let's try to keep it as consistent as we can.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I don't think that list, and remind me, certainly did not include food and beverage service for home occupations.
We had a piece to it. It was, I think, like I know you could do some portions of food and beverage services, but not others. I can't remember exactly what that wording was, but we can. We've heard you as far as the food and beverage services.
Okay, great. We want to be able to allow these types of things and that
Yeah.
preserve and enhance neighborhood character. All right. End of discussion. Anybody else for the good of the order there on that? Well, for the good of that discussion, I should say. Well, Brian, you have anything else that you need from us on that?
Thank you.
Thank you. Great discussion. Appreciate all the input
Sorry,
from
Chair.
Commission.
If I could,
Yes.
you have a public hearing scheduled for August 4th. I believe that's also neighborhood night. So can I just get a quick poll? Is everyone going to be able to be here on August
4th?
August 4th, I think it is.
Is this for a case?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, August 5th. 4th is council. It's the 5th. It's a Chick-fil-A PUD.
Oh,
I will be here.
Okay. I just,
yeah, I'll be here. I'll be here.
I'll be here.
Is neighborhood nights, like, is anyone going to the neighborhood?
Oh, is it the 6th? I apologize. I thought I saw it was the 5th. Okay, nothing to worry about then. Well, I still need to know if you're going to be here, but okay. Thanks, Amy. I thought it was the 5th.
Thank you.
Apologies.
All right, now back to the agenda. All right, thank you, Will and Brian. Do you have any other topics? Staff's choice. No attorney here tonight, so I think that choice is no. We'll go down the line with Commissioner's choice. Let's start on this side with Eric.
I don't have anything further tonight.
Nothing further.
I wanted to put something on the radar for possibly a future discussion, which is the Frank the Pizza King location is, has been sold and will be used as a car lot, is my understanding. And obviously, Frank the Pizza King, they didn't own their site, and the property owner is entitled to sell it and all of that. I think what I have heard pretty consistently through the South Broadway revitalization conversations is a community sentiment that more car lots is not what we need. And I'm wondering if there is a possibility for the city to essentially, look at some kind of regulation that would prevent sort of more car lots within the existing area where there's already such a high density of them. The city of Denver looked at, no new gas stations within a certain distance of another gas station, something along those lines. I think it feels to me like there's a community appetite to prevent more of those spaces from becoming car lots, and we've already got one that is going in that direction. So I'd love for us to look at how we can try to encourage other uses in that corridor.
Thanks, Noah. Colin.
Isn't that a conditional use for the Broadway corridor? I thought they had, is it used by right? For some reason, I thought that was part of the discussion before, was that it was a conditional use that had to.
Car sales and rental are used by right in MUB2 as long as you meet certain requirements like lot frontage, width, You have to have certain types of fencing, things like that.
So I guess how those get enforced. Okay, so I echo the sentiment though. If there is a way, great. I have nothing else.
Yeah, I third that. It's worthy of conversation, but nothing else. Brenda.
I'm good, thank you.
All right, and with that, we adjourn. Thank you, everybody.